Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Paul, for the invitation in this seminar. More globally, I would like to thank Nimbios and all the staff in Nimbios for welcoming me so kindly and hosting me during this week in Knoxville. Wow, this is an amazing place. I mean, I really enjoy to have so many, not blackboards, but whiteboards. It's really a pleasure for me as a mathematician. I think I will learn many things during this week with many stimulating exchanges. I will maybe learn also bluegrass music. Wow, some ingredients of it. So more seriously, my talk intends to give insight into the positive role of cooperation, of coordination for the management of ecosystems, biodiversity, ecosystem services. And this is a rather theoretical work which has been recently published in the journal Dynamic Games and Application, but as emphasized by the title of the journal, we have some applied content, underlying at least, and we had especially in mind application to fisheries or hunting with that work, but I think it can be extended. So, what I want to point out is that this is an interdisciplinary work in the sense that the joint work with colleagues from ecology, from economics, and modeling, and from different institutions here, French institution, including IFREMER, which is the institution dedicated to marine research. So my starting point is that, of course, as you know, the famous tragedy of the commons, so-called of the commons, with the seminal paper of Harding. I must confess that I don't like very much this paper. I think there is a confusion in the title. The tragedy is the tragedy of the open access, in the sense that non-cooperation between adjacent stakeholders exploiting a resource, an ecosystem, is detrimental for the ecosystem and for the exploitation. So this is the main idea. Reformulating this in more mathematical terms, there is the work of Levary and Meerman, who proved using game theory and comparing a cooperative solution and a non-cooperative solution that you have gains of cooperation, both in terms of long-term stock at equilibrium, but also in terms of harvesting pressure. As summarized recently by Belay, many works have been done in the same vein, using game theory, but the majority of the works were focusing on the single species case. An important exception are the works of Fisher and Meerman, so focusing on the two species case, again in the framework of game theory. So the goal of the paper were in line with these issues in the sense that we had three objectives. The first one was to extend the results, this idea of gains of cooperation in more general ecosystems, at least for end species ecosystems. The second objective was to focus more on biodiversity or ecosystem metrics, in terms, again, of gain of cooperation. And the third objective was to advocate the use of so-called mice modeling, models of intermediate complexity, as opposed to hand-to-hand modeling for operationalizing the ecosystem approach. There is a lot of debate for operationalizing the ecosystem approach. So people are advocating the use of end-to-end modeling. Well, their idea is to bring together different models from different disciplines, hydrology, fisheries, economics, and try to articulate them. But it's like black boxes that you try to integrate in a holistic way. Models of intermediate complexity that try to have more reduced model, focusing on a question, and trying to have more control in modeling terms. It means in mathematical terms and in terms of numerics. So, of course, I'm more inclined in this kind of mice modeling because of what I mentioned previously, the controls, mathematical controls, and numerical control. Okay, so to achieve these ambitious goals, we have relied on from the ecological side on the so-called multi-species convergence dynamics in discrete time. So Ixj is at time t is the stock value of the stock species j. So and the evolution of these stocks depends on two major ingredients. The first one is the well-known intersect growth. You can have for monospecies usual population dynamics. And you have a second part, capturing the interaction between species. So this is some kind of version of the Locta-Volterra dynamics for multi-species with S interaction between species. For instance, if Sjk is positive and Skj is negative, you have predator-prey interaction. You can also, you have some specific values on the diagonal of the matrix S, which relates to the inter-species interaction competitions, typically. Okay, what about the economy related to this? So we assume that the different species, different stocks are harvested by different agents. So Hij is the harvest of species I by J, species J by agent I. So the dynamics, we assume that the dynamics catch occurs at the beginning of the period. So we end up with this formulation. So here is the global catch, impacting both this species and the whole ecosystem, the other species, of course. Another important assumption for the model is that we assume that some homogeneity between the agents, the fishermen, in the sense that they have the same utility here. And this is a log linear utility in the sense that, and the preferences on the different species is captured by this parameter A. So typically you can assume that top predators prefer to prey for fisheries. It can make sense. So our initial goal was to prove to determine gains of cooperation. So we want to compare the cooperative solution with a non-cooperative solution. Please.
The constraint function on the sum of the h's, is that next slide? Nope.
Those
So there's a constraint function on the sum of the h's.
a constraint, you mean?
Yeah. Otherwise you go to negative. The previous slide.
The previous slide.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Of course, yes, there's a constraint. You cannot harvest more than the stock. Yeah, agree. Yeah. Yeah, you have to pay attention on that. I will comment on this later. So, but in terms of gains of cooperation, so we wanted to use not viability approach this time, but optimality approach, and comparing the cooperative solution and the non-cooperative solution. So the most simple mathematical problem is the cooperative one. This is an usual optimal control problem. You want to maximize over the whole set of catches among the species, among the agent, among over time. You want to maximize the discounted sum of utility over the set of agents. So the discount factor is fixed, it's rho, it is small, it is usually assumed to be smaller than 1. So you have some preference for the present as compared to the future. What about the non-cooperative solution? By contrast, here you assume that each agent intends to maximize his, her own utility, I should say discounted utility, with respect, the maximization is respect with to his, her own harvest. This is not clearly defined. In mathematical terms, you have to clarify the way to consider the non-cooperative solution, and especially you have to clarify the strategy of the different agent with respect to the stock and the other agents. And here, the strategy we focused on was to identify strategy in terms of feedback control, or Markovian, pure Markovian strategy, if you prefer. So the strategies are functions of the state, of the whole state, the ecosystem. And so the idea was to consider Markovian strategies and feedback controls, and to consider the dynamic programming of each agent, formulated here, and to consider the Nash solution, the non-cooperative in the sense of Nash solution of this value function. So comment on the value function. So this is a matrix formulation of the utility, the global utility. A prime is a transpose of the vector of preferences, A. And so here is the discount factor, G, sorry. This is really tricky for us. This is really the inverse. So G is the dynamics, the Gompertz dynamic I mentioned at the beginning, so for the ecological model. H high is the harvest over the whole set of species of agent high, and H minus high is the harvest of the other agents. So the Nash, it turns out that the Nash solution, I don't want to comment on the assumptions here, I want to comment on the result. The Nash solution, the optimal non-cooperative catch for every species, turned out to be linear with respect to the stock. So in other words, Hj for the non-cooperative case is proportional to the stock Xj. And the harvest rate is defined here, and you can see that it depends on the whole set of parameters, in the sense that it depends on the number of agent N, it depends on the preference over the specific species J, on the discount factor, on the interaction. I is the identity matrix. S is a matrix of interaction between species, so, and W is also a combination of the preferences and the interaction with species. I will comment on this W in a few minutes. This is a waste, a contribution of every species to the ecosystem. So what I want to point out at this stage is that the complexity in is captured by this term here. Complexity in terms of both the interaction between species and the preferences over the other species. A comment on the assumption, so related to this waste, this contribution value W. So it's just assuming that we have an interior solution. That is, we don't pay attention to corner solutions. This is a viability approach maybe that could solve the corner solutions. So here the focus is on interior solution. for sake of simplicity. What about the cooperative solution? We can do the complete computation of the optimal control problem, but an intuition is to consider that the optimal control solution, optimal solution is just associated with the case where you have only one agent doing the job for the whole group. So you can apply the result of the non-cooperative case with only by assuming that n is equal to 1. So again, of course, you obtain a similar result in the sense that the optimal harvest in the cooperative case is linear with respect to the stock, is proportional to the stock, I should say to the stocks. The catches are proportional to the stocks. And the harvest rate is defined here, and you see it depends on the preferences, on the interaction again, W, but there's no more n, so because n is equal to. We are ready to compare the cooperative and the non-cooperative solutions in terms of catch so far. And you can prove rather easily that that as soon as the number of agents is larger than 1, you have gains of cooperation, in the sense that the harvest rate in the cooperative case is smaller, strictly smaller than the harvest, the catch, in the non-cooperative case. So you have less pressure, in other words, you have less pressure on the different stocks, different species, with the cooperative solution. Maybe at this stage a few words on the proof. I mean, we are in a research center, in an institute, interested in the math, so I can say a few words on that, because I really think that this is a rather elegant proof. I mean, I like it. Two tricks, I mean, two ideas to simplify the problem and to have a very rather easy computation, mathematical solution. So an idea is to consider that the state is not x, but in fact taking the logarithm of the state of the stock is really convenient. And in the same vein, you can consider that the control is not the harvest, directly the harvest, but the harvest rate denoted by f. So why is this convenient? Because you can prove that with this change in state variables, you end up with the dynamics, linear dynamics with respect to the stock, I mean to the state. So here is the matrix of interaction. Linear with respect to the state, but non-linear with respect to the control. So from that, you can conjecture that the value function of the game is similar to the initial utility perf, that is log linear with a log linear form. You can use first order optimality condition with assuming this. And well, I don't want to enter into details, of course, but you have this kind of computations, and you can identify the different optimal harvest rate with this first order optimality condition, and then feedback the value function to identify the different parameters, that is W and this. So I think this is interesting in mathematical terms, the change of variables, the use of dynamic programming, and the use of Nash optimality condition can lead to very explicit formula. So this is really interesting. Okay, so far I've focused on results in terms of harvest rate, in terms of fishing, well, harvesting pressure. What about biodiversity and state and ecosystem state? At this stage, it turned out that it is we need to distinguish between two cases, the case where you have many agents and the case where you have few agents, exploiting the ecosystem at the different species and the different stocks. Let me start with the case where you have many agents, and I will stylize this in mathematical terms by saying that the number of agents n tends toward infinity. Well, if you examine the harvest rate in the non-cooperative case, this is the formula I already presented. And of course, as soon as the preference on the species J is positive, if n converge toward infinity, this harvest rate converges towards 1. Say differently, you harvest all the stock of the species. So, of course, as soon as you have this preference, strictly positive, there is a collapse of the species in the non-cooperative case with numerous agents. By contrast, if you consider the dynamics in the cooperative case, there is it doesn't depend on the number of agents, so this is strictly positive, and with the exponential of the Gompertz dynamics, you can have low levels, but it is strictly positive. There is no collapse. So we can reformulate this using the most famous biodiversity metrics. Most famous biodiversity metric, that is a so-called species richness, that you know perfectly. If the mathematical formula is this one, so this is the indicator function that is. So it is, of course, this is a Boolean function. This is 1 if x is larger than 0 and otherwise. So this is a complicated manner to define species richness. But in mathematical terms, this is the formula. Okay, so we can reformulate the results in that using this species richness by saying that, well, the species richness in the cooperative case, when with numerous agents, is larger than the species richness in the non-cooperative case. Well, what about the case of few agents? This is more tricky, much more tricky. To illustrate this, I will provide two numerical examples, with numerical values. In the case of omnivory, so I suppose that there is a top predator, species 1, a mesopredator, species 2, and a prey, species 3. So 1 is a predator of the 2 other species, and 2 is a predator of only the 3rd species. So this is captured by this matrix S of interaction between species. You see positive values on the upper part of the matrix. We assume that we have this kind of preferences in the sense that you prefer the top predator here. Why not? So the discount factor, 3 agents, we could have more, 2 agents, it could be similar. Here is a computation of the harvest pressure, the harvest rate, in the cooperative and the non-cooperative case, and as derived from the previous formula. So you see huge gains in the sense that the order of magnitude is 3. I mean, compare the different harvest rate. So we knew that. What about the species? So you have the evolution of the different species over time, optimal trajectories. So blue, cooperative solution, red, non-cooperative trajectory. And you see gains for every species. Blue is blue here. However, if I change not the structure, I keep the omnivory structure, but if we change a little bit the interaction, the intensity of interaction between species, you end up with very different results. In a sense that for species 2, you can obtain gains of non-cooperation. Why? What is the intuition? What is the mechanism underlying these outcomes? Well, in fact, it is rather simple, I think. In the non-cooperative case, the top predator is strongly reduced, even may collapse. And in that case, this favors, this promotes the mesopredator because there's less pressure on hit. And so you have this growth for species 2, for the mesopredator. And this can be associated with many examples in the literature or in the field, I should say, in the real life. For instance, in France, we have invasions of boars or deers, but I think it's quite similar here. You have similar things, or maybe raccoons. I've heard that have been really an invasive species, and so many situation of cascade trophics, trophic cascades. Sorry. And so it is called, I've seen that mesopredator release hypothesis in the literature. Okay, but despite that this analysis species by species doesn't provide gains of cooperation, clear gains of cooperation, we can obtain and derive gains of cooperation in terms of ecosystems and biodiversity and list ecosystem values. I will rely on two metrics, two scores. The first one is associated with the value function of the game. So it has a log linear function involving the parameter W. I will comment on in a few seconds. The intuition here is that you have the value function in the cooperative case is higher than the value function in the non-cooperative case. You have better performances. So you can prove using this idea that the ecosystem value in the sense of the value function is better, is higher than in the cooperative case than in the non-cooperative case. This is rather intuitive. And if you examine the case, the problematic case, the previous one, with species 2 performing better in the non-cooperative case, if you compute this ecosystem value, in that case you see huge gains of cooperation. So first score. What about this W, which clearly plays a major role in the metric? Well, maybe economists would say this is the price of every species. I will use rather the term contribution value of the different species. Well, this is a marginal value in the sense that this is the derivative of the value function, not with respect to the stock, but the log of the stock. So in that sense, this is the price of waste or a contribution value. It is strongly larger than the initial preference, so this is not really the utility valuation, pricing. So for instance, in the previous example, you see higher level as compared to the preferences, the initial preferences which were 1, 2, 3, basically. And I think in the two species case, you can really understand what is the role of this W. I will take the example where you have no utility for species 2, the prey. So species 1 is a predator, species 2 is a prey. There is no utility on the prey, species 2. In other words, A2 is 0. A1 is positive, S1, 2 is also strictly positive because you have a predator-prey interaction. In other words, you end up with a W2 which is strictly positive. So what is captured here is the contribution of the prey to the ecosystem service. So this is rather, in fact, simple. And the general message underlying this result is, and this metric, is that, well, you need to account for praise and the evaluation of the ecosystems and to prove, for instance, gains of cooperation. Another metric we can use to prove gains of cooperation. And maybe there are some specialists of networks in the audience that could help me to understand this result. So the idea is to provide an analysis in terms of equilibrium. So we can prove that at equilibrium we obtain this formula for the stock. So it is rather complicated depending on the different metrics, I should say. So F is a vector of harvest rate, optimal harvest rate. And what you can note is that if you compute the difference between this optimal equilibrium in the cooperative case and the non-cooperative case, you end up with this formula. And what is interesting is that this is positive from the initial result. That is, you have less pressure in the cooperative case than in the non-cooperative case. So this is positive. So if you can cancel somehow this matrix, you have gains of cooperation. So in other words, there's the inverse of, you can rely on the inverse of this matrix to have a new score criteria to prove gains of cooperation. And as I will try to illustrate in the two species case, this is somehow related to the trophic index or some kind of a trophic index analysis. To exemplify this, I will rely on the two predator-prey case. Well, I will not enter into the details of the computation, but what you can prove is that the inverse of this resolvent somehow matrix is associated with these values. Delta is positive, and what you can prove is that this value is strictly larger than this one because this one is negative. It means that you have to put more weight on the predator this time. So this is why I was mentioning the trophic index, because this is the major idea of the trophic index. You put more weight on the species on the high level in the trophic chain. I mean, okay, but I'm interested if someone in the audience have seen this kind of inverse matrix and how it is interesting in terms of connectance. So I think this is related to graph theory. I mean, but so far I've not really investigated this, so we'll be happy to have insight into that. Okay, so we have tried to try to apply these ideas, especially for fisheries. Paul mentioned a network entitled the Seaview Network, supported by the Bellman Forum in the framework of a call on scenarios of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And this network brings together different partners from different countries in Germany, Martin Cass especially in Norway. We have colleagues in Brazil too and South Africa. And we have also applied this in more specifically in a very interesting case study in French Guiana, the coastal fishery in French Guiana. This is a very stimulating case study for sustainable development because there is a high fish biodiversity there. I mean, at least more than 30 species are harvested, with a very interesting biodiversity in the sense that you have different groups, herbivores, piscivores, and so on. And a lot of interactions, and you have some emblematic species. You have sharks, you have groupers. In economic terms, this is also interesting because this is the production of the fishery along the whole coast of French Guiana is just consumed locally. There is no export. And it plays a major role in terms of food security, in terms of employment. And the other challenge in terms of sustainable development is that the human population in French Guiana is supposed to double within 20 years, which is huge. So in other words, a question raised by IFREMER, which is a French institute focusing on marine sciences, as I said previously, was interested in knowing whether the fishery could be developed to increase the production, to satisfy the potentially growing demand associated with the human growth, while still preserving a high level of biodiversity and also maintaining employment and the viability, the economic viability of the different fisheries at play. So very challenging, sustainable development. And we have data for this fishery, thanks to IFREMER. And so we were able to calibrate more in line with the Gompert's dynamics I've presented previously. And here is the comparison between the cooperative solution in blue, and the non-cooperative solution in terms of, this is the inverse of species richness. There's a number of species, the loss of species. So, and you see huge gain in that case between the non-cooperative case and the cooperative case. Okay, I think I guess I'm on time, maybe. I think I will stop at this stage if you, yeah.
So we have time for a few questions, but foolishly I have the microphone, and so I'm always going to go first. Eric's trying to cheat by bringing a second microphone in. So look, I wanted to ask a bit about what we can infer about the relative importance of some of the parameters, what in econ would be called comparative statics. So thinking about the control for the non-cooperative case, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. So one is, as best I could tell, the species interactions were always multiplying the preference weights. I never saw those things separate in the mortality term. And the reason I want to flag that is there's plenty of people in here who spend a lot of time trying to quantify one species interaction and then not thinking about prices or preferences. And there's plenty of people who think about quantifying prices and preferences but ignoring the ecosystem. But if I saw right, those things are always side by side. So we don't have any a priori reason to think one is more important than another. The other one that stood out was, as best I was looking at the discount rate, big surprise, and it looked to me that the discount rate was scaling with the number of players. So its importance was going to drop the more and more players you loaded into the system.
Yeah, not sure to get your question, the first question, but so at the beginning, we separate completely the calibration, I mean, the count of the ecological parameters from the economic one. This is your point?
So
at the beginning.
So does the result give us any reason to think one is more important than the other, or are they both equally important, meaning we should split our research effort between them?
So the main result is here, and you see that this is really the interaction between the preferences, so let's say the economic part and the ecological parameters captured by us are really, how do you say, connected. So the interaction is important in terms of results and outcomes. So you have to pay attention on both. So regarding your second question, the discount factor. Yeah.
So looking at that, if n gets big, you could divide top and bottom by n. Discounting is only going to matter for smaller numbers of players because it's going to be rho over n.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the result. I mean, if you have smaller number of results, you become less for interaction. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And regarding the discount factor, so the assumption here is that we assume that we have the same discount factor for every agent, which can be relaxed. I mean, this is a huge assumption. I know that you're interested in having different discount factors. This is not very difficult, I guess, to deal with different discount factor in that case.
So thanks a lot. So this is a question about, tell me if my intuition is completely screwy. So the formulation of the underlying game between non-cooperative and cooperative, to me, is sort of two extremes of what could happen in a coalition formation cooperative game structure, which is not the game structure that you've used here. But is it fair to say that if you were to do this in a cooperative game structure with coalition formation, that you would get something in some sense intermediate between these two, or has that not been done? And is there a need for the whole different solution sort of structure in the way that cooperative game theory, the core and all the other components of it, has that been interfaced with this at all?
So yeah, I agree. We should pay attention to intermediary structures, coalition. I suspect that we will have this medium results, but I'm not sure. This has not been done, as far as I know.
Has it been done?
I mean, and potentially in mathematical terms, I think it's feasible, because you can start with coalition using, well, Nash solution, but between groups.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it is a good idea.
So have people applied the sort of more what I'll call
Coalition
traditional,
theory.
traditional cooperative game theory in this kind of context at all?
Not that context. We did something related to variability for using coalitions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not so many works for coalition in dynamic context. So there are some. But I guess that in the multi-species case, I don't think there are something.
Okay. There's a dissertation for somebody.
Yeah.
I can comment. I mean, I think that if you do straight, like optimal control of PDs or something, you can. I mean, people have done. I've done things like coalitions and competitions between coalitions and things like that, but not. I didn't do it for fishery models actually. So.
What's the difference between the models that you did and these?
These are fishery models, right? So it's more like the underlying maybe some competitive dynamics and cooperation. So it's got some mixture of competitive and cooperative in it. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't like that. It was more. Yeah, it was sort of focused at like combat applications. So where you having these groups cooperating with these groups and fighting with the other groups, something like that. So, yeah.
What is the motivation for writing just one utility function and not having separate utility function for the different agents? So here looks like in the non-cooperative case, each agent is just maximizing over the total utility. Am I reading this wrong?
Yeah, so with this log linear function, can have substitution between the different species in the utility.
But so you're maximizing over the ith component, but you are maximizing the utility function, the utility function. You don't write.
Yeah, it's what you put into the utility function. See how you're putting the ith component in the utility function. It's got every possible thing, right?
But you fix the other. Oh, okay. I see.
And it is not separable at first glance, but, well, in somehow, yeah, it is separable. You have a sum here. Yeah.
So, look, I'm going to ask you a question about applications. So, as you motivated it for us, you motivated by ecosystem-based management and multiple species. So, the state variables you motivated as species. And the agents, you talked about them, and your little cartoon suggested they were fishermen. But when I looked at the mathematics, it seemed to me that a lot of what you had would continue to apply. We have to worry about what the shape of the S matrix might be to multiple stocks in space, for example, and the agents potentially not being fishermen, but being different management agencies, be that regions or countries. Would the same approaches work?
I suspect we could do something. Yeah, I mean, we could apply this for not only fishery but hunting, for instance. But I suspect we could apply this for land use management with species without utility function. I mentioned the last score with a species, a prey that has no utility function. So I think we could do more refined things, and not only fisheries. But so far it has not been done, but I guess good.
Even keeping to fisheries, I'm not sure when it turns into mathematics there's anything that says that XIs need to be different species in one place, as opposed to different stocks inside a meta population that's being managed, and your agents then are different countries or fishery management agents.
Yeah. But, well, there's no especially explicit model here, but you need to account for interaction between the groups. So I'm not sure we could directly deal with these issues, but